and all was known. You could feel beauty rising.
Hi, my name is Sue Skaskia with Vermont Volunteer Services for Animals Humane Society, and welcome to our show, For the Animals. Today I have a very special co-host, my daughter Lauren. Lauren's co-hosted before, actually a few shows, but now that she's back in Vermont, she's helping us out today. What we've done was to go online, and we found some pretty interesting topics that are pertinent to Vermont at this time of year, emails that have come over, newspaper articles, so we thought we'd do a little mishmash of things. Some are happy, some are sad, some are pertinent, but I think you'll find them all pretty interesting. The first one is very important. Natura recalls expanded. That's it's a pet food supplier, and the dates on the packages are December 14th, 2013 to March 24th, 2014. And we've just learned that Natura Pet, the makers of Evo, California Natural, Innova, Healthwise, and others that are high-end scale, have expanded the pet food recall that was initially issued last week.
This recall notice was put out by West Lebanon Feed and Supply in West Lebanon, and we thank them for this information. The recall includes certain Natura products that were manufactured at a production facility during a particular date range.
And we urge you to use the links below to determine whether any product you may have purchased is included in this recall. And if you discover that a product you purchased is part of the recall, you're advised to either contact Natura directly for instructions, and that number would be 800-224-6123, or contact the store that you bought the food from to walk you through the steps involved in disposing of and replacing the product. And as always, be sure to use caution when handling any of the affected foods, and be sure to wash your hands with soap and water immediately after handling. That's on the advice of the American Veterinary Medical Association. Salmonella, safety, frequently asked questions.
Note, all pet food bags should be stamped with a date and/or batch code, which can be used to determine whether or not the product you have is included in the recall. To determine whether the product you purchased is included, go to Expanded Recall List on Natura's website.
Yeah, but be prepared. It's 48 pages long. I pulled it up.
It's a long list.
Yeah, I pulled it up on the website, and it is extensive, which is pretty scary if you think about it. We have a viewer, a friend that sends a list to me pretty much weekly, every other week, about some foods that have been recalled, animal food. So it's something to be aware of.
AVMA's Salmonella Safety Frequently Asked Questions and Natura's press release on March 29th, 2013.
And AVMA stands for American Veterinary Medical Association. West Lebanon Feed and Supply is committed to taking a very proactive stance on all product issues recalled. But if you have any questions regarding whether or not the food you have at your home is included in this recall, please don't hesitate to call for further information or assistance. Again, it's West Lebanon Feed and Supply, and their number is 603-298-8600, and we thank them for putting this out there. And in the meantime, please note that some of these varieties may still be available from batches outside the affected date ranges.
It's important to be aware.
Yeah. The next one comes from Care to Cause. It's an email site that I get in all the time. They've got some really interesting articles, not only about animals, but pertinent things in the news. 2 villages in New York have abandoned their plans to kill Canadian geese in their communities. And it says, quote, "You've helped to save these geese families who otherwise would have suffered greatly. Your emails and letters, more than 1,000, and your phone calls were heard. As a result, the geese are now safe."
After Scarsdale voted to hire the USDA to kill the geese, we asked for your help. Following your letters and calls to the town's officials, they hired Geesebusters instead. Geesebusters uses a powered 3-dimensional mechanical eagle which flies in a prey-seeking circular motion. Geese recognize the predator as real and immediately flee the target area. After a little while, they will avoid the area, seeking safer habitat.
That's pretty impressive.
It's a good way to use a drone.
Yeah. Well, I know that if you can buy owl statues, and put them on your buildings to keep pigeons from landing. And it goes on to say, in response to pressure from animal protectionists, including In Defense of Animals and supporters, the section of the contract with the USDA Wildlife Service calling for slaughter of geese was removed. Instead, they will conduct egg oiling, a procedure that uses corn oil to prevent eggs from hatching. There's a strict protocol that needs to be followed to ensure the humaneness of this procedure.
Thank you for speaking up for the geese. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Margaret Mead. This is definitely time sensitive. Raccoons, along with foxes, gray and red, skunks, and bats, are considered a primary carrier of the rabies virus in the U.S. Actually, any warm-blooded mammal can carry rabies. And this information we've taken from Wild Neighbors.
Facts. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, only one human has ever died from the raccoon strain of rabies.
You know what? I was amazed when I read that. Because how raccoons have gotten such a bad rap when it comes to rabies and the scare of the terror that's in people. What's the other fact?
A rabid raccoon is usually dead within 1 to 3 days of becoming infectious, and even if you're bitten by a rabid raccoon, effective post-exposure treatment is available.
Yeah, and it depends on where you're bitten by a rabid animal because the virus has to travel up to the brain. And that's why the only way to test to see if an animal is rabid is to send its severed head off for testing. So I've heard so many times people say, oh, it was rabid. No, unless you know that, you don't know that. So, is that raccoon rabid? How do we know? If you see a raccoon in your yard during the day, don't panic. She or he is not necessarily sick or dangerous. It's perfectly normal for raccoons to be active throughout the day. She may merely be foraging longer hours to support her young, visiting a garden while the dogs are inside, eating fermented apples left over from the year before, or moving to a new location.
Seeing a raccoon during the day is no cause for panic. Key in on the behavior of the raccoon before calling for assistance. Look for a staggering gait, an animal seeming oblivious to noise or nearby movement, erratic wandering, discharge from the eyes or the mouth, wet and matted hair on the face, and self-mutilation.
And again, when you just said staggering gait, if they're going to eat fermented apples, they're drunk.
Tipsy.
They're drunk. They're going to be staggering. Raccoon roundworm. Prevention is the key here. Keep raccoons out of attics and crawl spaces and supervise young children and pets outside to make sure they don't come in contact with raccoon feces. If you find evidence, make sure you clean it up properly. Leptospirosis. It's caused by a bacteria that can infect raccoons, skunks, opossums, nori rats, mice, and white-tailed deer. Humans may be exposed if they come into contact with infected urine or contaminated soil and water. Avoid touching wild animals. Yeah.
Obviously.
If contact is necessary to get a raccoon out of your house, live traps work well. Don't try and raise baby raccoons by yourself.
They're meant to be in the woods.
That's what, and we have dedicated wildlife rehabbers in Vermont that can work with several of these species. If you've watched some of the shows, Nancy Curie is a wildlife rehabber, and she's out of Burlington, but she is absolutely awesome. But she frequently at this time of year, coming up in the next month or so, gets inundated with calls from people who have killed a raccoon, and then discover her babies. And the poor orphan babies without their mom, they're going to die. And Nancy will take them in, as will other licensed wildlife rehabbers, and wean them. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Attacks and bites. It isn't uncommon for a healthy raccoon to be active in the daytime, but it's highly unusual for a raccoon to be aggressive towards a person. A female may boldly defend her young, arching her back and growling or giving a loud woof, and perhaps lunging at a person she deems threatening. Only very rarely will a raccoon chase after someone seen as threatening.
Well, and what mother wouldn't?
Right.
Just think of any mother that's going to protect their young.
Till the end.
Right. So it's a good idea to make sure that you close up your sheds, your shacks, and anywhere else that a mother might seek out to have her litter. A raccoon who appears ill or disoriented or who engages in unprovoked aggression may be rabid or infected with canine distemper or feline parvovirus. Get your cats and dogs vaccinated against rabies every 3 years. And we were talking earlier that years ago, the law in Vermont for rabies shots was every 2 years. And VVSA worked with other organizations and veterinarians to convince the Vermont legislature to extend it from 2 years to every 3 years, which makes sense because you're not over-vaccinating your animals. And the virus itself, the rabies vaccine rather, is good for 5 years. So every 3 years vaccination works. So, and it's not very expensive. You can find probably in March a lot of rabies clinics. I know we just had one and we charged $10 per vaccine thanks to Kedron Valley Veterinarian Clinic in Woodstock. They're awesome. We're really lucky. We've got a lot of great veterinarians throughout the state. So many animal behaviors that have observed wild population of raccoons as opposed to the semi-domesticated one in suburbia have noticed that raccoons are out in the day a lot when they're in isolated places. Becoming primarily nocturnal appears to be a response to living near people. I thought that was interesting.
Raccoons that are out during the day are not necessarily something to be frightened of, especially if the animal is behaving normally. Could be having the equivalent of a midnight snack, and there shouldn't be cause for immediate concern.
Okay, however, if the animal appears disoriented, uncoordinated, ill, or approaches you aggressively, stay away and contact animal control. Make sure there aren't babies around. Again, a mother's going to do anything she can to protect her babies. And with all raccoons, at night or during the day, use caution and common sense when observing them. They're large animals and they could put up a heck of a fight if threatened. And I don't think you know this. We're working on a condominium right now that's on the second level, and the other night we had a cooler outside with food in it, and the cooler, did you hear this story? The cooler started shaking and we couldn't find a light to turn on fast enough, but what it turned out to be, a little piece of plastic from the cooler had been left out, and the raccoon had it and was trying to drag the food out of the cooler and shaking it left her. And so somebody went out and put like 50 pounds of cement on top of it that really deterred him. But he was able to scale 2 stories up to get at food. So they've got some very good sniffers.
It's not a good idea to feed them deliberately. They're little Houdinis when it comes to getting into places they're not wanted, especially if there's food on the inside.
That's right. So, and feeding them accustoms them to coming to your yard and lessens their fear of humans, which can be fatal if they encounter somebody that's not as humane or tolerant as you, and it puts you at a greater risk of encountering an animal that's sick. So again, please think, don't react. Think when you see raccoons out during the day.
Enjoy them from a distance.
Right. And the next one.
A very important issue. Bumblebees in our world need our help and need us to be aware of what we are doing to them. And in the news, we're learning more that flowers contaminated with metal are behind the bumblebee decline. More than a little evidence has linked pesticides to the alarming decrease in the numbers of bumblebees in the U.S. Now, new research from the University of Pittsburgh suggests another factor: metal pollution.
According to a recent study in the journal Environmental Pollution, bumblebees are ingesting metals such as aluminum and nickel in toxic amounts. The metal comes from flowers that have grown in soil contaminated by exhaust from a combination of motor vehicles, industrial machinery, and farm equipment. Modern agricultural practices, in which more and more tasks are mechanicalized, are contributing to the decline in bumblebee numbers.
Bumblebees can detect the presence of certain metals in flowers by tasting them, but not from afar. That is, by the time they've identified metal, they've ingested some. The bees are able to ignore some metals and will still forage from contaminated flowers, so moderate to high level of metals can accumulate in the top tiny creatures' bodies over time.
Tia Lynn Ashman, who is a biological science professor at a Pitt and PhD student in her lab, studied bumblebee behavior around uncontaminated and contaminated impatiens. This North American flower provides an ideal place for bumblebees to seek out food, as it has large blossoms and produces plenty of super-rich nectar daily. The researchers collected fresh flowers for 2 weeks and observed the bees' behavior in a lab.
Notably, the bees tasted and then left flowers containing nickel, but this was not the case for flowers contaminated with aluminum. The bees foraged on these flowers for as long as they did uncontaminated flowers, adding to the levels of that metal in their bodies.
Why the bees sensed nickel but not aluminum is not yet known. Mendel cites previous studies that found higher concentrations of aluminum in flowers than of nickel, a suggestion that bees may actually be, quote, more tolerant or immune, end of quote, to the presence of aluminum.
A scary fact is 40 to 50% of the U.S.'s population of honeybees has been wiped out this year. The ramifications for supplies and prices of U.S.-produced honey and of almonds, fruits, and vegetables pollinated by honeybees are huge, and beekeepers have become more and more aware of the damage pesticides can do.
In the case of bumblebees, these powerful chemicals are just one threat. As the Pitt researchers' findings suggest, looking even more closely and critically at multiple aspects of modern farming practices and their environmental impacts is necessary to ensure their survival. You know, I noticed in Connecticut, a lot of the homes that I passed had the bumblebee homes.
Hives.
Hives, yeah. And I know a long time ago, around here, we had a lot of farms that had them, but I don't notice them now driving around. Have you?
Not here, but I want to. I'm interested in keeping bees myself. I think we need to help the pollinators out. We depend on them, and I've heard the statistic that without bees, life on this planet would end in 4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty scary, especially with what Monsanto just pulled, too.
Yeah.
Okay, here's some happy news. This is from Corpus Christi, and it's KIII News. 2 sick dogs walked into a human hospital and ended up getting the medical care they desperately needed. It may sound bizarre, but it happened Friday at Christus Saffron Shoreline.
The 2 puppy pals were dog-tired after their big adventure. In fact, when we arrived at the Corpus Spawn shoreline, one was cuddled up comfortably under a secretary's desk. Around 10 a.m. Friday, the canines walked straight through the glass doors and into the hospital's lobby. Like other patients, they waited patiently to be seen.
Dr. Jim Cato and his staff decided to help the emaciated pups. Meanwhile, his staff gave them a little TLC. The next task was finding them a home. The Gulf Coast Humane Society agreed to take them in if they could get a ride to the shelter. So the doctor carried his patient and placed him in the back of the Channel 3 news unit.
Reluctantly, the pups leave the comfortable back seat. We walk inside, place them in their new temporary home. In just a few short weeks, the puppies should be ready for adoption. But you better believe they'll never forget their big adventure at the hospital.
I love that. Okay. This came from U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders on an email to a friend of ours. Thank you for contacting me about the Safeguard American Food Export Acts. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to your concerns regarding this important issue. If enacted, this legislation would again ban the slaughter of horses for human consumption in the United States, as well as the transportation of horses for slaughter overseas. Congress passed a ban on the slaughter of horses for human consumption in 2006, and all horse slaughter plants in the U.S. closed in 2007. Unfortunately, the ban has lapsed, which will now allow horse slaughter plants to open.
I share your concerns about the safety of horse meat for American consumption, and I have serious concerns about exporting unsafe food products to foreign countries. After all, horses in the U.S. are not raised by the same standards as other animals raised for human consumption, and some have been treated with drugs which are not approved or intended for human consumption.
Or pet food. He goes on to say, and I quote, "I believe that preventing horse slaughter in America is as necessary a step not only to protect human health, but to protect animal rights as well." Statistics from the USDA show that 92% of horses sent to slaughter are in good condition and could continue to lead healthy, productive lives. Your concern for this issue is echoed by many fellow Vermonters, and national polls show that you are joined by 70% of Americans who also favor this ban. And he goes on again for thanking her for contacting him and invites anybody to sign up for his e-newsletter, the Bernie Buzz, at sanders.senate.gov.buzz. You know, the horse slaughter issue, what happens to horses now, I think they get the short end of the stick. People use horses until they're tired, until they've outgrown them, and then they go on to the next step, and the majority of those horses don't end up at a very happy place at the end of their life. And now they're shipped off to Mexico or to Canada. And we know in Mexico, animals do not have a very good plight. It's pretty grim. So I really feel for horses. They're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Stand up for them.
Stand up for them. And this next one,
On the cover of the Sunday, April 7th New York Times, titled "Videos Show Cruelty on Farm and Taping Becomes the Crime," and it's on the web, titled the same.
okay, with both the front page story and the web article, we can see a photo of sows in gestation crates, which are individual crates that do not provide enough room for a pig to turn around or even lie down comfortably. Each intelligent animal spends much of her life staring straight ahead or biting fruitlessly at the bars, going insane from both mental and physical distress. I mean, imagine being confined, just like this, your life.
Reporter Richard A. Appel Jr. opens the article by describing some effective undercover animal cruelty investigations that have led to prosecutions of the abusers.
He writes, but a dozen or so state legislators have a different reaction. They propose to enact bills that would make it illegal to covertly videotape livestock farms or apply for a job at one without disclosing ties to animal rights groups. They've also drafted measures to require such videos to be given to authorities almost immediately, which activists say would warrant any meaningful undercover investigation of large factory farms.
Critics call them ag-gag bills. He describes the work of the American Legislative Exchange Council, which has created a bill called the Animal and Ecological Terrorism Act. It prohibits filming or taking pictures of livestock farms to defame the facility or its owner.
And then the reporter writes, quote, violators would be placed on terrorist registry. Yes. The article points to the First Amendment issues inherent in the various ag bills and the chilling effect we can expect from the threat of punishment for whistleblowers. Here in Vermont, we have the same bill that was introduced by the Senate Agricultural Committee and sponsored by Senator Robert Starr, Democrat from Essex, Orleans District, Senator Eldridge French, Democrat, Rutland District, Senator Norman McAllister, Republican, Franklin District, Senator Richard Westman, Republican, Lamoille District.
The bill, as introduced, is S-162.
And basically the part that should jump out the most is, quote, a person commits the offense of agricultural facility fraud if the person, with the intent to commit an act that the person knows is not authorized by the facility's owner. And we're going to be following this bill and reporting it to you in our next show. In the meantime, please be sure to contact your legislators at 1-800-322-5616 and tell them that freedom of speech is a guaranteed right.
I can think of several places that cameras have caught abuse and neglect. nursing homes, child centers, school buses, and yes, slaughterhouses and auction sites.
Right, and you know, the Agency of Agriculture is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it serves only the industry. It does not protect animal welfare, and the bottom line is money. And now, to end on a really happy note, the show that we had last week had Jeter, a dog that needed a temporary home, and Eastwood Animal Clinic was kind enough to board Jeter while his owner was in search of new housing. And we're happy to say that thanks to an animal rescue person, Jeter is now living happily and comfortably, temporarily, in a home, and he has just turned out to be one awesome dog. He's still overweight, but he's getting the exercise that he needs. If you recall, he was the Shepherd Cross that was about 80 pounds overweight, and he's just doing great. So, and thank you to the people that called about him. It's nice to know that people are watching and people are caring. So, again, thank you for watching For the Animals. Lauren, thank you for doing this show.
Anytime.
And please join us again next week.
At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment when all was known. You could feel beauty rising on the breeze, the shapes, the stone.